All right, let's get right into it. Picture this, it's 1910, and a single report gets published that completely rewrites the rules for modern medicine in North America. It took a system that was, frankly, chaotic and dangerous and turned it into the scientific, respected profession we know today. But, and this is a big but, that progress came at a huge hidden cost. So today, we're going to unpack the Flexner report, how it managed to both save and, in some ways, sabotage American medicine.
And you know, the author, a man named Abraham Flexner, he did not hold back. He went and visited 155 different medical schools, and this is the kind of language he used to describe them. Filthy, neglected, unscientific quackery. I mean, that language alone tells you this isn't just a story about reform, it's a story about a complete and controversial revolution. He saw a broken system and decided the only fix was to tear it down to the studs.
So, just how bad was it before Flexner showed up? Well, to put it mildly, it was chaos. The early 1900s were pretty much the Wild West for medical training. There were no real rules, no universal standards, and honestly, the quality of doctors being churned out was dangerously all over the map.
And this right here really paints the picture, doesn't it? Look at the difference. Before the report, you had hundreds of schools, many of them just trying to make a quick buck. The standards were a joke. You could literally just open a school. Lab work? Yeah, that was often optional. Then, after the report, the whole system gets flipped on its head. Suddenly we have way fewer schools, all tied to universities with tough scientific standards and really high admission requirements. This was the mess Flexner was brought in to clean up.
And here he is. Now, the most interesting thing about Abraham Flexner is that he wasn't a doctor, not at all. He was a very respected educator, an expert in reforming colleges. And that outsider status was actually seen as his biggest strength. The idea was that since he wasn't part of the medical boys club, he could give a truly honest and objective assessment of the situation.
Okay, so Flexner diagnosed the problem. Now it was time to write the prescription for a cure. So let's take a look at what the report actually said needed to be done and, maybe more importantly, who was footing the bill for this massive overhaul of American medicine.
Yeah, this was no small-time operation. You had some major power players involved. The whole thing was commissioned and paid for by the super-powerful Carnegie Foundation. It also happened to line up perfectly with what the American Medical Association, the AMA, wanted. They were eager to professionalize the field and get rid of the competition. And then, once the report was out, the Rockefeller Foundation swooped in with millions in grant money, but only for the schools that played by Flexner's new rules.
And this was his blueprint, the 4-point plan that basically created the modern doctor. First, make it harder to get in. You need a high school diploma and at least 2 years of college science. Second, make sure everything is based on hard science, anatomy, biochemistry, you name it. No more skipping labs. Third, medical schools had to be part of a real university and a teaching hospital. And fourth, you needed full-time professors and tons of hands-on clinical experience. Sound familiar? It should, because this is pretty much the system we still have today.
So the prescription definitely worked in some ways. It made medicine more professional and it raised standards across the board, but oh boy, did it come with some serious side effects. And the first big one was the total and systematic wipeout of any medical philosophy that didn't fit neatly into Flexner's very strict scientific box.
Just look at this chart. It's stunning. This shows what happened to just one area, homeopathy. In 1900, you had 22 homeopathic colleges in the country. By 1923, a little more than a decade after the report, only 2 were left. This wasn't a slow decline, you guys. This was a purge. The report basically gave these schools an ultimatum. Change your entire philosophy, or we will shut you down.
And this is the key. The report wasn't just about standards, it was about promoting one specific kind of medicine, allopathic medicine. That's the fancy term for what we now just call conventional or Western medicine. You know, the system that's heavily focused on using drugs and surgery to treat symptoms. This became the only game in town.
And because of that, entire fields of study were just tossed aside. Things like naturopathy, herbalism, homeopathy, they were all labeled unscientific quackery. And with that label, their schools lost funding, they lost their accreditation, and one by one, they were forced to close their doors. What this did was create a really powerful medical monopoly built around a pharmaceutical-based model, and that legacy is something that still shapes our entire healthcare system today.
But if we're talking about damaging side effects, there's one that stands out above all the rest, one that we are still dealing with over a century later, and that was the report's blatant racial and gender bias.
These new, expensive, elitist standards didn't just change what was taught, they fundamentally changed who was allowed to become a doctor.
The numbers here are just devastating. For this report, there were 7 medical schools in the entire country that trained black physicians. Flexner went to all of them, and he recommended that 5 of the 7 be shut down. Just 2 were allowed to remain open, Howard and Meharry.
And think about the ripple effect of that decision. It's staggering. Researchers have estimated that if those 5 schools had stayed open, they would have trained somewhere around 35,000 more black doctors. 35,000. That is a massive void in the medical community that directly led to health disparities that still exist right now.
And if you want to understand the thinking behind this, you don't have to look far. You just have to read Flexner's own words from the report. He wrote that the main job of a black doctor wasn't to be a surgeon or an equal to white doctors. No. Their role was to teach hygiene to black people, mainly to stop diseases from spreading to their white neighbors. The racism wasn't a bug, it was a feature of the plan.
And for women, the result was just as catastrophic. The report's new rules, the high costs, the requirement to be part of a big university, meant that most of the women's medical colleges couldn't keep up, and they closed. On top of that, many of the big universities that did survive the reforms went back to being male-only. The result? Women were almost completely locked out of medicine for the next 60 years.
So here we are, left with these 2 completely opposite stories. One is a story of incredible scientific advancement. The other is a story of profound social regression. More than 100 years later, how do we make sense of it all? As you can imagine, the legacy of this report is complicated.
I think this balance sheet really sums it up perfectly. On the one hand, yes, the report created a standardized, rigorous system that made American medicine a world leader. It grounded everything in science. But on the other hand, it absolutely decimated diversity, it wiped out alternative approaches, it made it harder to find a doctor in rural areas, and it helped create the elitist, pharmacentric system we have now. The crazy part is, all of it is true.
And this timeline just shows how much we are still grappling with all of this. It took until the 1970s for women to even begin returning to medicine in any real numbers. It took until the 1990s for the government to create an agency to study the very alternative medicines the report threw out. And get this, just in 2020, the Association of American Medical Colleges finally renamed its most prestigious award, the Abraham Flexner Award, publicly citing the report's racist and sexist legacy.
And so all of this leaves us with a really tough question. The report gave us scientific standards, but look at what we lost in the process. Did it have to be this way? Was it really impossible to modernize medicine without sacrificing its diversity, without erasing its more holistic traditions? Over a century later, we're still trying to find the right balance.